All right, joining me right now to discuss all of this, former Congressman Alan West, also political analyst Dick Morris. Gentlemen, it's great to have you both here with us.
Pleasure to be with you, John.
Quickly, guys, I'll start with you, Alan. Your take on this deal, do you think the situation is diffused for now?
Well, I don't think it's diffused for now. I think it's, the Band-Aid approach to try to get the temperament to settle down, because as it was stated in the read-in, we don't really know when these elections are going to take place. We don't know when these constitutional reforms are going to take place. We don't know what behind the scenes Vladimir Putin is doing to manipulate this situation. So there's still a lot of question marks out there.
Dick, you know the situation in the Ukraine. You've worked there. Tell us what you think is going on behind the scenes that we're not hearing about today.
I think the government is capitulating. I think that the threat of EU sanctions and the threat of American sanctions made by Biden the other day have had a big effect. And I think that in agreeing, the agreement that they signed, which was also initialed by Western diplomats saying they would enforce it, calls for the constitutional reforms within 4 weeks. And it calls for an election by the end of this year, by the end of 2014. The fact of the matter is that Yanukovych, the president, is going to get clobbered in elections because 2/3 of the Ukraine is non-Russian speaking. Right. 1/3 is Russian. And it'll be a 2-to-1 margin. It wasn't last time because Putin turned off the gas. And,
so will he do that again?
Well, but this time I think there's been enough of a protest and enough of a situation. So first of all, he would face global repercussions if he did it, and I don't think he would. And secondly, I think that the people of the Ukraine would understand that they need to push through this and vote. One of the reasons for demanding elections by the end of the year is so it's not during the winter, so that it's in the warmer weather where conceivably Putin would
Alan,
have less leverage.
Do you agree with Dick when he says that he thinks that the words of Biden got through?
See, that's where I think we have a disagreement, because right now, what type of credibility does the United States of America have? And that's the big point. I mean, words are one thing, but you got to have actions. You got to have actions.
We do with sanctions. We were very effective in sanctions on Iran over Obama's objections. The sanctions in Serbia.
Yeah, but he just said that if new sanctions would have come, he'd veto them. So I don't really understand.
In Iran, but not in Ukraine.
In Iran, but I'm saying there's a precedent this established. He talks about a red line in Syria, then when we get to it, then it's not my red line, it's everyone else's red line. Putin knows that there's a sense of weakness there, and he's going to push this to a point.
But it's primarily the European Union sanctions we're talking about, because Ukraine is, after all, part of Europe. And the vast bulk of their trade is with Europe, not with Russia or with the United States. Mm-hmm. And Europe has really been very effective on this. And I think that he's really caving into Europe. After all, this whole fight started when the president of the Ukraine signed a deal with Putin, rejecting membership in the EU.
So let's take a step back and take a look at this situation as it relates to Putin, as it relates to President Obama. There's a lot of talk, kind of a Cold War revival situation. In fact, this week, President Obama had this to say specifically, quote, "Our approach as the United States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in a competition with Russia, but would it be a good idea, since we are already dealing with Putin on Syria, on Iran, to look at this in a bigger picture and try to, maybe, and I don't want to sound like I'm trivializing this here, but get some significant progress with both Iran and Syria as it relates to Putin?"
Ukraine is far more important than that. Ukraine is the key to the reassertion of Russian power.
Of course, and so as we are involved here, directly or indirectly, behind the scenes or out front, because it's so important to Putin, is there an opportunity here to make some advances on Syria and Iran with the Russians?
The implication of that is trading Ukraine for Syria and Iran. I think Ukraine is a lot more important, because ultimately Russia will not be a threat to the United States if it does not have the Ukraine. It's not a sufficiently large, gravitas country. And I think that that's why Putin has been fighting so hard for the Ukraine, and why the European Union has been pulling so much in the opposite direction.
And nobody wants to admit that we'd be using the Ukraine as a negotiating tool in this whole thing, but at the same time, we can't be so naive as to think that that hasn't been discussed.
No, you can't be naive, and I think that there's a sense of momentum that Vladimir Putin believes that he does have with some of the successes that you've seen, like you say, with Syria, with Iran, and his elevation on a grand world stage. So this is a place where you have to make the stand against Putin and understand the importance of the Ukraine, understand the importance of the natural gas pipeline that goes through there. That's really what it comes down to, the natural resources, the energy resources, the ports that Ukraine has there on the Black Sea. So this, from a strategic perspective, is very important, and I think that it can lead to some other operational type of victories in some of these other regions as well.
Yeah, and more on Putin, of course. We know what his strategy has been. He's been very vocal about what he wants to see happen with Russia turning it back into the Soviet Union. We know that he would like to see U.S. foreign policy undermined here. Dick, do you think that this, in any way, shape, or form, could be used by Putin and have him claim this as a victory?
No, no, no. It's a big defeat. And I think that we have to realize that in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, freedom has regained the momentum against Putin. The entire evil empire, call it terrorist or communist or whatever, in Latin America is now under threat because of the revolution in Venezuela. And the entire capacity to dominate Europe is under threat because of the revolution in the Ukraine. That is the ultimate problem of all of these authoritarian regimes. They go to bed at night knowing 3/4 of their people hate their guts. And it's very hard for them to be stable and to rule. And it's easy to bet on them in the short term because there's no free speech. But over the intermediate term, they all fall apart.
And Yanukovych has a perception problem. When you have protesters that have been shot, headshots, you know, right into the lungs.
The images are graphic.
The images are horrible, and you're turning snipers on peaceful protesters.
That's right.
So they're losing that perception battle.
That's right. And I think that that will outlast the winter, and I don't think Putin can turn this around. And I also would point out something else. If he loses Ukraine, I am not sure Putin's stability at home is assured. A, because of the rekindling of riots and demonstrations in Russia, which recently reached a fever pitch, and B, because the military will be very, very unhappy with him. The debate will be who lost Ukraine.
And all fingers will be pointing at Vladimir Putin. And what next after Putin?
Well, that's the unknown.
Oh, we're not up to it next yet.
Yeah, that could be the
shot.
unknown. But like I said, I think right now you have to deal with the situation on hand. And there may be an opportunity to bring Putin into some type of camp where he could be a little bit more, you know, compromising to us.
Whenever you look at Russia, you have to appreciate its terrible vulnerability to the increase in U.S. energy production.
Absolutely.
Russia is like Saudi Arabia. It's a one-crop country. Half of its GDP is energy-related.
All right, Dick, we'll pick up the discussion. We'll have Dick and Alan back for more right after this break real quick. We want to, of course, hear from you. Anybody want to talk to us on social media? We're always available to hear your comments on Twitter or on Facebook, or email us directly. You can get the information up here on the screen. When Dick and Alan come back with us, we'll talk more about the Ukraine Plus. Some of these administration initiatives, things like tracking our license plate, putting operatives in newsrooms. Have they finally reached the end of the limit on this? Have the American people had enough? More coming up right after this.